Um, Hi friends, host Eric here with Jongy Brown again, and he did a smart thing, which is he said, "Would you like to talk right now?" Which is always a good way to go because at any given moment I might not feel like I'm doing anything better, so I might as well talk to somebody. you know. Um. So apparently
Okay.
he's somewhat familiar with TWFP. Has been checking on it occasionally for a few years, and self-identifies anyway as an ENTP. Uh, what are your? Do you have any opening salvos here? Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, queries,
All right.
quandaries?
So I have a lot, and I'm not quite sure where to start. So I guess one thing. So I have my best friend who's like a poster child for an INTP, and uh, so he's not as into psychology as I am. He's a little more skeptical of it, and one thing he keeps um, like harping in on is um, like our type static. What if you get hit in the brain, and your personality changes, blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, those are extreme cases, but as a general trend, like an INTP isn't going to flip all of a sudden and become an ESFP who has like a completely different attitude towards life and everything. But that did make me start thinking about, you know, cases like that, or I hear things about the left and right hemispheres of the brain potentially having different sorts of personality traits. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. And let's see. Yeah, then I had just some kind of typology questions. Why, certain slot necessitates this, logically, why the the blind spot of an ENTP is necessarily FI and these sorts of things. Um, but
Well, let me
I
start
guess.
with the thing about, about traumatic brain injury or whatever. So in general, what that's called is arguing from the margins, and by and large, arguing from the margins only serves to establish the general rule that in fact we can only see dramatic personality change via trauma, significant trauma, would be indicative of the fact that there's an inherent mechanics that, unless the integrity of the system is disrupted, is necessarily going to express as meow, 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 or meow. Okay? So the problem with arguing from the margins in that way is it's assuming that we're claiming that type is static independent of stuff that might happen physically to your brain. I don't think anybody's making that claim. Obviously, wherever a variety of maps about identity or consciousness or whatever may have derived from, they're necessarily acknowledging that most of our conscious attentional efforts seem to be brain centric. I mean, it doesn't make any particularly good argument for or against cognitive functions to talk about regions of the brain being responsible for meow meow because it ignores the fact that those things are framing it through a different frames. Like attentional manners are saying we're trying to explain how the way people pay attention uh, necessarily falls into certain kind of configurations, and there may be other things about human experience that aren't covered by that, but any explanations about other things that aren't covered by that, those explanations are covered by that. So, um, it that's my best response to that. It's not a good argument against cognitive functions.
Well, that's what I kind of thought too. It's just he's just the type of person, like any
Sort
sort
of,
of. I give him any sort of statement, especially some sort of absolute statement like types don't change. Then he's like, well, what if this or this, But let's see. From there, so let's see. Another thing I guess was I like I said, I've been following your channel for a long time, and I feel pretty confident in my ability to type most people. I feel like I have a pretty thorough understanding of typology. Um, uh, it's not something I've systematized as much as you have, but I, you know, but for whatever reason, it took me years and years to finally be like, oh, I think that I'm probably ENTP. I kind of like thought that I was INTP for a while. I noticed so many glaring differences between me and my buddy, and then I was like, well, maybe I'm INFJ, even though they have different stacks, but I could kind of relate to different parts or whatever, and I would see differences between you and I, and but ultimately I have settled on ENTP, um, and so that made me think about uh, I guess wondering maybe how you may have changed as an ENTP since your 20s to now, and also I had a very uh, unstable kind of toxic upbringing where I wasn't really allowed to express myself very much, and I think that may have made me think that I was more introverted than I was when really I was just repressing a lot of things around my family to make sure that everything didn't explode. Um, and
Well,
yeah, I
let
don't
me
know if you see anything there to go with.
let me start by saying that the people, the Eric that people see on TWFP is always going to be talking, pretty much, or listening. One of the two. If I'm talking to somebody else, I'm either listening to what they're saying or I'm talking. If I'm talking about myself, I'm talking. If it's me and Rachel, I'm talking 95% of the time. She's talking 5% of the time. So it's natural for anybody watching me to assume that and conclude that I'm more extroverted than I actually am. There are long stretches of time where I am silent, and Rachel and I will often drive around in the car and not say anything to each other for long stretches of time, and there's a lot of time when I'm watching TV and I'm not really saying anything, and so it's like it's it's somewhat misleading to watch my channel and go, this guy seems a lot more hey 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 than me. I mean, obviously when I'm making videos, I'm in my hey 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 mood, but I'm not constantly making videos. And when I'm not in that mood, then I'm going to display kind of differently. Like right now, I'm not in a particularly extroverted mood just because I'm at the. This is the first day. This is the first day of Sleepy Week, so to speak. But
Yeah, I'm familiar with the term. I actually do something quite similar. I just ended my sleepy week today, so
I
I also described that at all.
I need to get my second cup of coffee from over here. Give me a second.
Yeah, no worries.
Do you have a significant other like me? I'm blessed with an INFJ.
Uh, so I am kind of all right. So I just kind of got out of this 4-year relationship with, I'm guessing, she was an ISFP. She was very hard to for me to type or understand for the longest time because so much of the FI was hidden, um, and it was just kind of a strange relationship to begin with. I went to community college briefly, and then I dropped out because I was like, I don't want to. Uh, I'm not feeling the stuff I'm studying for. Then I had a run in with drugs and kind of wasted a bunch of time. And then I had a friend drag me off to do seasonal work at all these different resort centers across the world or the country. And so I met her at one of those, and then we were in like a 4-year long relationship. That just ended. I definitely think that after some time, especially living together, uh, the especially the NI and I, I'm presuming that I'm a ENTP, but I'm not sure. I'm still always doubting, but it does seem evident to me at least that we would have sort of any TI and an FINI clashes. That would That ultimately just led to us being like, yeah, this is not working out. And then kind of, I guess, talking with an INFP girl, who that's been a strange dynamic too. But yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
let
What do
me
you
just
think? Because you're
intervene
all
right
into
here.
the FI.
Let me intervene for a second.
Yeah. Go ahead.
As an older ENTP, if in fact you are an ENTP, that particularly tempting looking cake in the window called the INFP chick, that don't take a bite of that. Just walk right away, turn around and walk right away. It might look delicious, and maybe your first bite you're like, hey, I really like this, until gradually you realize it's filled with poisonous FI.
And that's kind of how it was. I think early on, I I play music, and I'm always, it took me a long time to accept to myself even that, like, I want validation from others, and she just would kind of just dump mush all over me, sort of like, you're so talented, you're so creative, you're so, and it would feel really good, but then yeah, after a while, just the kind of fickleness of the FI would sort of, I would never know. Like, I would think everything was cool, and then she would get home from a bad day, and there's just this like toxic cloud of FI just like lingering above everything, and then I would say something, and then she would think it was like some sort of there's some sort of like hidden message that's like an attack within my words. I'm like, no, I'm just saying what I'm saying. I don't know. So
Well, I will say
yeah,
that on terms of affect, you do carry about you a bit of the affect of what I would call beat up ENTP. So, like, beat up ENTP, which there are a fair number to, considering the total number of ENTPs, a fairly high percentage of them, I would suggest, gets sputtery and feels often at a loss for words because there's something inherent about talking ideas out that's risky. If the other person is ill intentioned, no matter how good the words you say are, they can sometimes be turned against you. And so, if you're accustomed to having words turned against you, um, it's like if you're accustomed to having your failures exploited to beat you up with, it tends to make you more tentative in terms of your expression. I know this from my own experience in my last relationship, where by the end of it, I was quite tentative in my willingness and capacity to express myself, at least around her. And I can imagine how, depending on circumstances, that that expresses more or less in various ways. Um, but the other thing I wanted to say is you talked about having a run-in with drugs, and I want to note how prepositions make a big difference here. So, if I were to run into drugs, for me that would be like, okay, this is a happy occasion. I've run into drugs. But if you have a run-in with drugs, that's like not generally considered to be a good thing. That suggests there's probably the law involved, law enforcement parties.
well, yeah, you're correct with that presumption. Yeah.
Yeah, I have had a run-in with drugs in that regard as well. What I really did was have a run-in with the Oklahoma State Troopers. It wasn't so much
Mm.
with the drugs. They took the drugs
Well,
away from me. They made the drugs run away from me.
mm,
Um,
but
okay. What other thoughts do you have, or just speak for a bit?
okay. Well, I guess one, just to elaborate a bit on that. That kind of happened as a consequence of being in high school. I broke like 3 bones back to back. The doctors prescribed me a ridiculous amount of opioids, and then that led to me being physiologically and dependent. And then there was the mental addiction, and I got pretty far out on it, and but I never got to the point where I was being a totally shitty person because of it. But I did, I never stole from people I cared about, or any actual person or anything like that. But it did lead to me getting really in a lot of trouble with the law, and that's still kind of, you know, is a pain I have to deal with. I think next year I can get things expunged. But let's see. And I guess you probably, I think, would share similar thoughts on this. My first time in rehab, I rejected a lot of the things because I didn't like the this sort of, totalizing like dogma of it. Like you have to not do any drugs ever, or you're just going to end up, on the street, doing sexual favors for your drugs. And if you smoke weed or do anything like that, like you're doing now, then your whole life's gonna be ruined. And while they're drinking coffee back to back and smoking cigarettes, and I think I just rejected all that. And I mean, now I still use substances and things, but I've found a way to mostly manage and be functional and all of that. And so I say,
That is the holy grail.
yeah. Um. So let's see. Um. What
For the
else?
record, I've never actually been to rehab, but
Hmm.
I did go to AA, and like you, whatever it is I was doing never really made me into a shitty person. Although it made me kind of an extreme, at certain times, extreme version of Eric that was not necessarily pleasant, you know. And yeah, like you, for a long time I failed to make those systems useful to me because of my intellectual opposition to the legitimacy of the case they were making, you know.
Yeah, I actually ended up basically being in rehab because my attorney was like, "You should do this now ahead of time. It'll look good. It'll probably get you out of trouble more." And it did. I mean, I ended up escaping with just probation and no felonies, which was great. But yeah, I mean, the rehab was kind of centered around NA and AA, and I remember getting in like a big argument with one of my therapists because she had no experience with addiction, uh, personally, her family or whatever. And then her husband was a cop, and then that really kind of angered me. I'm like, you're in here doing this, but then your husband's a cop, like just sweeping everything under the rug and putting people in dog cages because they're taking things in their own house, not harming anyone. So it just wasn't a very pleasant experience. And I get caught up on the term God and things, which since then has taken a different meaning, taken on a different meaning for me. But let's see.
What does it mean now?
Um, hmm. Um, I, I could go on a very very long tangent about all this, but I don't know, because of experience I've had, uh, even uh, I guess arguments that I've seen and formulated relating to physics and everything. Has led me to believe that, and ultimately, it's a metaphysical assumption. So I realize I'm kind of having to take an intuitive leap of faith, but uh, I kind of view, um, the modern paradigm. It seems is physicalism. Everything sort of it supervenes on the physical, um, where I think now consciousness is fundamental and everything emerges from that. And so. Uh, Basically, I'm not sure what God is. I kind of think maybe that think of us all as sort of a kind of little antennas picking up on consciousness, which is sort of this all-pervading, uh, like radio wave or something, TV channel. You like trying to punch through a TV and rip out the actor. That's how I kind of see trying to find consciousness in the brain and solving the hard problem of consciousness and whatever. So anyways, God to me, I guess, is just it's j- um, you know, I the everything everything, and yeah, I don't know. I guess just something uh, beyond me, and maybe sometimes these voices or intuitions in my head telling me not to do something or whatever. Call it the Jungian self, or super ego or whatever. Just something outside of my ego that's like, Alex, this is a dumb thing to do. Don't do it. You know that I don't know. So
Here's
I
the
don't know what
deal.
God does.
Here's the deal. If you ask me, people are always saying, oh, I don't know exactly what God is, or meagity mew, right? But the reality is, we all do know exactly what God is. He's an old guy with a long beard who stands in the clouds.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Isn't it time we all be honest about that?
That's how he's usually portrayed.
I mean, we pretend like, oh, we don't know what God looks like. Yeah, we do. We totally know what he looks like. He is an old guy with a big, long white beard. He stands in the clouds. Sometimes he's got glowing stuff around him. Um, he's the guy whose arm it is who's touching that other guy who's lying down all gaily on the cloud. You can't see the rest of him, but you can see his arm. We already know what his arm looks like in great detail. It's that arm that's reaching from the clouds, right?
yeah.
You could probably pick out God from a lineup, for Christ's sakes. I mean, this notion that we don't know what God looks like is insane.
I guess my problem was, yeah, that was what I had always. I mean, I was raised Christian, Baptist Christian, very dogmatic, and then so that's what I always associated God with. Which now I kind of think of God as something that would transcend any sort of kind of
You
conceptualization.
got a problem with old men?
It's not that they have a problem with old men, but I have a problem with well, maybe I do to some degree.
You're going to be so embarrassed when you get to heaven, and there he is. Ah, Jongy. Didn't think old man was good enough to be God, huh? Now, what do you think of
Yeah.
it? Huh? Look at my glowing halo.
He might not. He might be kind of mad at me for things I've said in the past.
He's not
About
really,
it.
he's not keeping that much track, I don't think. People assume just because he's omniscient that he's paying attention to everything at the same time. Just because you know everything at the same time doesn't mean you're paying attention to each piece of knowledge concurrently.
Does he have are the apostles now his secretaries?
I think John lives basically in a part of heaven that's kind of like a retirement community for active adults. It's got tennis courts. It's got pools. They serve meals. They serve lunch at 11:30 and dinner at 4:30 p.m. to make sure that everybody can get to bed on time. But because he's been dead for a long time, so he's got to be pretty old dead. You still age after you're dead. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I didn't know that.
Oh,
Yeah, you still
well,
age
how
after
old do
you're dead.
you how old do you get? Like once you get past a certain age, you would think that, like, I don't know what a 4 or 5 thousand year old person would look like. Going, if we age at the same rate we do here, then
They're basically like a raisin.
raisin. Uh,
And they all talk like old Jewish people from New York.
well, that's something to look forward to. Um, so I've seen some of your videos talking about God, or how you might describe yourself to some degree as a Christian, not in the sense that most people would assume that to mean.
That's what most people may say, but I describe myself unqualifiedly as a Christian.
Okay. So do you have a certain way that you would go about um, I don't know, defining God, or whatever? I sort of take the whole idea of that Kierkegaard, kind of proposed, where it's like sort of, I think this is what. Sorry for the chaotic camera for a second, but sort of like to try to make all these arguments proving and blah blah blah, like to to show for sure that like, oh, we know God exists sort of misses the point because the whole thing is sort of predicated on belief. So like faith is kind of the tenet of you know
Did
the fundamental
Kierkegaard say
tenet
that?
of
You know, I always
Christianity.
liked Kierkegaard. He must have been an
Yeah, I think he
ENTP.
says.
Okay, well,
Well,
my whole point is my point is this: I define God as the thing I pray to.
okay, that's a. I would say, yeah, that's similar to how I would define it. It's something outside of me, uh, wh- and something I've been very. I like to experiment with all sorts of mind altering substances, psychedelics, disassociatives, and things like that. And definitely, I've felt like I've experienced some sort of conscious, maybe not agent, but force or something outside of me. And at the very least, Kierkegaard also had said something about the function of prayer being not necessarily to try to change God's will, but to sort of articulate your desire so that you can kind of uh, fit into the plans of God or whatever. And I'm not like a huge
Everything. No,
Kierkegaard
just
scholar.
even these casual renditions of Kierkegaard's positions sound very much like mine. And the thing is, I've never really read much Kierkegaard. A little bit I have read. I liked. I think his basic point at the end of his career was attempting to philosophize is insane. The best we can do is poetry, basically. But but I think it's less insane than he says it is because I think we can describe fairly precisely the manner of insanity a given person is likely to express, even if we can't find a mean sanity to compare against, right? So the thing is, if you think about my definition of God, it's biconditionally operationalized, which means you can use it to test if something's God, and you can use it to test if something's praying. Um, is this thing God? Well, am I praying to it? If not, then no. And also, um, how do you know that thing's God? Well, Eric's praying to it. So, in other words, it's a perfectly good definition for any possible use by a third party in trying to identify what God might be. The only reason why people don't like it as a definition, of course, is because it doesn't generalize. It doesn't allow people to say, yeah, but only you have access to subjective data of the thing you're praying to, and so I can't meaningfully use your definition except by verifying with you that you're in fact praying or not. You know. So the and what they want is a definition that they can use argumentationally. In other words, I want you to link God to some static and unmoving representation in language that then I can do language operations upon. But of course, that's it's like as I often say, it's like saying justify jogging. Well, I mean, I can come up with reasons why I jog, but none of them justify it. It's a category error, right? It's not like justify your affirmation of spending this public money on more nuclear weapons. It's instead a matter of well, it's what I feel like doing, or it's like just about anything is adequate as a justification because nobody can invalidate your choice to go jogging unless you were previously committed to do something else. So it's a category error of how people view the question in general. If people view the question of belief in God as one that can and should manifest as argumentation, then the negation is always going to win, simply on the grounds that the affirmation fails to meet the basic burden of defining the thing they're making statements about. And if you treat it as a behavior, then of course it's clear how ridiculous trying to argue about it is, in the same way as trying to say, well, affirm to me that it's better for you to choose to go jogging right now than it is for you to choose to play tennis. Well, what? I it's a behavior. It makes clear that one party is taking the wrong approach to thinking about and attending to and approaching the question.
So I guess the way I've gone about it is I think I understand where you're coming from. But I just sort of kind of been like, the whole arguments for and against God. Ultimately, to me, kind of, I mean, I think it's easier to argue against, like the Christian God or this religion's God or blah blah blah. But whenever we're just talking about God as just um, some, something outside of that, it's like to me, uh, if God exists, then it's something that we can't, capture in words or concepts. It like necessarily is, so far beyond our comprehension that um, to me to try to define it or whatever sort of misses the point. And so I wouldn't try to um, make a bunch of logical arguments why someone should believe in God. I might say, you know. I don't know. Regardless, it's just like, yeah, to me, it kind of misses the point, and it's just like, well, either you choose to believe or you don't, and really, there's kind of yeah, I kind of see what you're saying with the whole action thing. That, but would you say the whole, I guess, argumentation of like saying like, well, it's something that necessarily uh uh transcends all ways of framing it. Would that just be some sort of like cop out? You think, or
I mean, I think the bottom line is people's arguments about God are not indicative of anything more complicated than the reality of that most people can't and either can't or aren't accustomed to or aren't willing to or simply aren't for whatever reason managing framework at all. So if you're thinking about something and you're having positions on it, then it's a wise idea to position that bucket of stuff within a variety of larger buckets to see how it plays within larger systems and other frames of reference, right? Because if you want to fully understand how something is going to impact ideationally, then you got to say, well, where are comparable instances of the same, where the same logic would be applied, and what would be the outcomes? And if, like, for example, you're going to test a normative system, like, well, my thing is that you should your rights should be earned at the tournament of valor. And if you fail to earn them at the tournament of valor, then you're a slave. The reason it doesn't validate basically is that it seems intuitively to violate our sense of decency when we actually view what the experience of those who are rendered slaves is. And additionally, it violates our sense of fairness because there's an implicit assumption that each person owns themselves, and that's why slavery is bad, right? So, if you look at something like that, which is basically a moral calculus, you're checking to see if it makes any sense by checking against your intuition and against your reasoning. Are you going to bed?
Yeah.
Good night, darling.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. I love you.
Mwah.
I'll probably see you in there pretty soon.
Okay.
Um, and and the problem is that let's say you are going to use your intuition and your reasoning. How those questions play out is going to differ depending on the context in which you're evaluating them. And the capacity to consider how they play out in multiple contexts without committing to any single one might be deemed ambiguity tolerance, and is required. Much more of it is required in the world than people generally provide.
okay, let's see. So that kind of segued into another thought I had, and I can tell you're probably wanting to wind down soon, so I won't.
No, every night I lie to Rachel. Every single night. It's not that I'm lying. When I say that, I believe it to be true. night after night.
Mm-hmm.
Then hours pass and I go inside.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just see. I'll keep your interest as long as I can until you're like, okay, I'm going to bed. So, so, from that, I believe that you, if I understand you correctly, that you affirm some sort of moral absolutism, at least as insofar as uh, negative moral obligations as opposed to positive moral obligations. But I was wondering how you would go about, say, uh, you know, because it seems to me intuitively that we all act as if there, or most of us act as if there are some, moral truths. Like no one would want to, seeing someone, abuse a child or these sort of like horrible things. But how do you go about someone saying, well, I taking a more egoist, I guess, position, like I want to maximize my own happiness and freedom, and so by doing so, I'm just going to enslave everyone else and make them do everything for me and blah blah blah. Like, how do you sort of because it seems like ultimately epistemologically there has to be some sort of uh,
Let
intuition or
me.
some sort of leap.
Well, first think about it on just a practical level. If I'm if I'm going to be telling people this, I'm definitely not going to be able to enslave everybody. In other words, it doesn't validate on other people's metrics at all. If I go, okay, so here's my plan, everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enslave each of you at gunpoint. And once you've resigned yourself to being my slave and always obeying my orders, then I'm going to use you to commit a bunch of terrorist crimes or whatever. And then we're going to take over the world. If somebody ever says that, they aren't going to be. That's not a good way to win friends and influence people, right? So, in other words,
Right,
right
right.
off the bat, you have to lie about what you're doing in order to
Hmm.
accomplish these things. In the other instance, you don't, which is partially why lying is bad. Which is to say, when you're honest with people, then the the opinions of others keeps you in check. Now, why is this sort of universalized or something? Well, my point is, on an argumentational level, you start someplace axiomatically, if and you say either we agree or disagree with the following: slavery is acceptable. If you disagree with that, then the negative obligations all follow naturally from various sorts of ownership rights, and there's a perfectly good logic to the whole thing. Now, if you don't agree with that
Hmm.
axiom, then you are you are saying that your words don't link to your reality. So, in other words, you refuse to play by words at all. If in fact
Hmm.
you say, "No, I'm going to affirm slavery," then you're saying, "I'm going to make sure that what I say and what I do don't match up." Because there's no reality in which I can both affirm slavery, accomplish slavery, and be telling the truth to a bunch of people. It just doesn't.
Hmm.
It just doesn't sell. So in that
Well,
case, you're
and it
saying,
also
"I'm not. I'm not. I'm not arguing." You know.
right. And also, I would think that it would ultimately be against their own self-interest if they're taking an ego, like a more egoistic position, because if you allow slavery to exist, then uh, then there's nothing really keeping the people you care about from being enslaved, or for you from or keeping you from being enslaved. So it kind of, and you probably don't want to be enslaved. It seems most people don't want to be enslaved unless it's like a consensual sexual thing, and then it's like a game. So it seems ultimately like it just, yeah, it
Well, the
would
bottom
just
line
not
is,
be good for even them.
I mean, people live in communities, and they either are behaving as part of that community, or not. And so it's like, There've always been instances in human history where community X attacks community Y because the community X people don't have to justify why did you kill my brother, whereas no, because they don't know anybody in community Y to hold them to account, right? So it's like within a community, one has to abide by a certain amount of rules, unless you're this sort of absolute monarch like Kim Jong Un or something. In which case, everybody but you has to abide by some of these sort of rules, right? And so as a consequence, it, a a sense of universal morality emerges when there's more information fluidity. The 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 faster and more instantaneous information flows, the more investment one has in distant others, and the less likely it is for us to be able to exclude them from our moral calculus. So, sort of morality or ethics grows and becomes unified as information becomes more and more fluid.
Okay. Um, yeah, that sort of I know I kind of had the idea is not fully fleshed out, but I'm not sure where I got it. I'm always reading all these different philosophers, and then instead of reading the whole book, taking selectively and making this hodgepodge of things. But it seems like to me, at least, history over time, morality is becoming more and more just and fair, and it seems like part of the something that's been integral to that is the division between the other the like these people are outside of ourselves, like for example, what was it, like Aristotle saying, there are two types of men born to not be slaves and men born to be slaves, or the USA justifying slavery, saying that black people are these like beasts and this sort of shit. And then sorry, can I curse on this? I don't want to get you in trouble with the YouTube police. I'll try not to. But it seems like as the sort of barriers dissolve, things are becoming more and more fair. Sometimes there's like this push pull, and sometimes you have
Well, and this is
uh,
reminiscent of an argument I had with Taylor the other night on a live stream where my position was things are not necessarily always just, but that fairness is still very important. So it's like he got punished by YouTube at some point for spreading COVID misinformation, okay? And he's
mm,
sort of understandably outraged about the increased mood of censorship, which I get. But the thing is, I opposed or generally the COVID measures we were taking from the get go, and I was a strident voice of it, except I never said any bullshit. In other words, I never made any claims I couldn't sustain. So that's what I mean by things become more fair, which is as long as you've got smart people in positions who make decisions, they're able to distinguish between people who are making unjustified intuitive leaps in their claims and people who are not sloppy in their claim making. The things I was critiquing were were not in disagreement with broad scientific consensus about reality, They were using what that broad scientific consensus about reality said to make cases about policy that were strongly opposed to the existing approach to policy, which is a totally different matter. That's what belief in fairness on the metaphysical plane means, which is I get their rules and I believe they're going to apply them, the letter and spirit of them, and they know what I'm doing is totally legit argumentationally. And even though I may be on the same side as a bunch of people who are making idiotic arguments, that doesn't mean I'm making idiotic arguments, and I'll be judged on my merits.
mm. Yeah. So I don't make YouTube videos, so I'm not as familiar with the way that YouTube works as far as banning and warning and all this sort of thing. But something I've kind of been concerned about is, so on Facebook a few weeks ago, um, someone in this ENTP Facebook group posted some video that I guess was like a rehearsal for like some interview they were going to do on the space station, and so it devolved into this argument over if space is real and this flat Earth stuff. And so I go in there messing with this guy, and I'm like, "Space isn't real, dude. Think about it. Like, have you ever, you know?" And then he's like, "Oh, you seem like you have your mind made up, so I'm not going to argue with you." And I was like, "Dude, think about it. It's just a big black piece of paper that ancient Satanists, put up, and sometimes bugs eat through it, and then God, he can't get to us because of the paper, and the bugs eat through it, and that's what scientists that are dumb think are stars, and so I keep going on this thing. I'm very clearly messing around, and then at the end, he was like, I was like, here is irrefutable proof, and it's like, from, because he brings up Galileo, and then so I post a screenshot from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where the one of the characters has like Aristotle and Galileo and someone else, and it's like science is a liar sometimes, and it like it has like the B word over them, and I received a 3-day ban, and so I have been it's been kind of weird to me because it seems like that was something picked up by an algorithm. I don't think the guy reported me because I saw the next comment. He's like, "Oh, I see, you're a troll." Uh, so yeah, that just seems it's kind of spooky to me. These sort of like algorithms that are just kind of honing in on certain words, phrases, and you have to kind of self censor yourself. Like if you say a certain word, people will like I'll see, instead of people saying white people, they'll say YT, or these sorts of things. Um, so that's why I was like, I don't know, is the YouTube police going to get you for curse words? Because yeah, I'm not sure to what extent the whole moderation process here it's automated or it's an actual
Let me
person.
talk about that a little bit because I think it's interesting, and I appreciate YouTube's approach in the following sense. I had a bunch of videos at one point that basically now when you upload, if you're monetized, they ask you to indicate if you have any of the following things in your video, and I never have any of them, except occasional curse words, which is fine. They don't really care about that. But as long as it's not like chock full laden of every other word being a curse words, they really don't care. Um, Now this is for uploaded videos only, not for live streams. In my live streams, sometimes things get a lot more adult. I'll talk about drugs or something, or sex or something, but
Mhm.
not usually in any of my uploaded videos. So the thing is, I tell them what's in it, and then if then the algorithm would say, no, this is a bad video, and I'd appeal it, and I'd win the appeal, and I've won every single appeal, and I had to appeal like 8, 10, 12 videos, I don't know, quite a few of them, because I do tend to trigger the algorithm words, but like I said, I've won every single appeal, which means whatever the human is who's watching it can tell the difference between something that's makes sense and is good, which is stuff that I'm producing, and stuff that's actually like some sort of disguised hate speech or just bad thinking, flat Earth bullshit or whatever. Now, note, this is not my validation of eliminating those flat Earth voices from the conversation. I believe in the marketplace of ideas. If you oppose them, prove them wrong, or ignore them. And idiots are going to believe what idiots are going to believe, no matter what you tell them. So, I oppose the censorship, but I also respect the fact that YouTube has smart enough people working for them to tell the difference, or I would have lost one of those appeals.
So, has your channel ever like actually been copyright stricken? I guess not. You've appealed them all.
No, I've never got. I have one strike, or warning, what you might call it, but it's not for copyright. It's for bullying C.S. Joseph. Now, the
Or not
particular
copyright,
video,
but yeah, just stricken in general.
yeah, the video that I got warned about was admittedly very uncivil in its discourse, uh, and I called him lots of names and stuff like that. And it was shortly after they had announced this big, hey, we're cracking down on this shit. And sure enough, I got busted. I haven't done anything like it since. I haven't had any problems since. I have had a video get copyrighted, but that just means the way that they copyrighted me was that I didn't get a strike. I got it gets put on where they get any money the video earns and I get nothing from it. And that to me it's like, okay, well, whatever. You know, that's fine.
Well, I misspoke. I just meant like I think that the way the thing works is you get 3 strikes and you're out or whatever. I just meant any strikes in general. And I think that I actually saw a lot of the CS Joseph stuff, and I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah, well, it was just
um,
one particular video that got busted for bullying.
yeah, yeah, that guy. Yeah. Anyways, I won't speak on him because I don't want to get you in going and get you in more trouble. But
I mean,
yeah,
it's fine. It's fine to have civil commentary saying he's not a good typologist and he does a poor job. That's fine. In the video in which I got busted for bullying him, qualifies as such, I suppose, because of the kind of sort of insulting name calling and so forth that I was doing. Which
mm,
it's like, well, it, basically, I don't disagree with YouTube. I'm better than that. I don't need to lower myself to that shit. But I wish the warning would go away because I've had it for years now, and it's like those things used to go away after 3 months or whatever. At least have it go away after like 3 years, please, because I'm just tired of fucking seeing it.
yeah, my Facebook account right now it's like it's on some warning status, but it doesn't really tell me what. And most of the time, it's just been from me messing with people. There's been some arguments where I would throw some little quippy remarks in there too, because the other person would just be annoying and unfair and whatever. But yeah, I don't know, the whole it just kind of freaked me out. The whole after a certain point, just everything is deleted, and I don't think I ever said anything that incendiary or cruel or
I think
um. But
your
regardless,
description of your trolling of the guy about space and stuff is very exemplary of FI polar. Like, when you're doing this, at no point are you really considering the time, experience, and emotions of the other person, except as this sort of object of your mirth. Now, I totally get that because that there was a long period of my life when that would totally. I mean, I used to go play this game called Diablo, and just sort of
yeah.
and just troll the shit out of people all the time and stuff. Um, Talk to me about your why do you engage with people like that on Facebook?
Okay. That time, well, okay. So to be honest, a lot of it lately has been so I'm in a kind of complicated living situation right now. Like I said, I was doing seasonal job stuff before COVID, and then that kind of ruined that. And so currently back at my grandparents' house, awaiting to be able to move in with my sister and her boyfriend. It's kind of a bunch of stuff. Anyways, so and I've had a lot of downtime, and so sometimes I'll take my Adderall prescription and I'll just kind of get in a kind of like a fighty mood, or sometimes it's just a playful mood. And usually
Oh,
for this, say what?
I said, oh, and like enough said. You're like, oh, I get it. You're gacked out.
Yeah, well, it's not just that. I mean, sometimes I'll do it even when I'm not on the. But usually, like it was like this guy. I was just playfully. I was like, "Come on, dude! I like space isn't real. Like, think about it, man. Like, And then he was like, "Well, obviously, it seems like you have your mind made up, so there's no convincing you." Blah blah blah. And so then that I just
You
he
just
was
couldn't
so
help
dismissive
yourself.
and blah. Yeah, I couldn't help myself. Now there was another recent argument where basically uh, the ENTP group on Facebook that I'm in, I think it's the dominant one, the biggest one or whatever. There's a lot of like vile stuff being spread constantly, and I think that's part of for one reason why I was like I don't know if I am an ENTP. I don't relate with a lot of these people. I think, and also just side tangent, I think a lot of them seem more like ESTPs, kind of using their TI to justify this sort of like NI singular conclusion that they won't budge from, and then whenever I press them, and they kind of just don't do anything. They
My
ignore it.
my
But
guess is 90% of those so-called ENTPs are either ESTPs, ESFPs, or something else.
well, and it kind of makes sense to me. What I was thinking is, it's like, well, you have the extroverted talks a lot, sort of crackheady types, and ENTP is framed as the smart one. So of course everyone wants to be the smart one, and so, um, but like for to go back to your question, like there's this one guy, and there was a lot of what I would say was pretty blatant misogynistic posts currently going on, and then this ENFP is like, you guys need to be. He comments, it's like, you ENTPs need to be nicer to women, blah blah blah. And so there's this guy in the group that I had noticed for a while, him just kind of being a bully to everyone. And he says something. He's like, how are you? If you come in here, you better justify your claims and blah blah blah. And I'm like, so I was just feeling fighty that day, and I'm like, this guy, I feel like messing with him, and so it's like, what do you need to him to justify that, because I think the guy said women are people and they deserve respect. I'm like, do you need him to, justify that women are people? Do you need him to justify that they deserve respect? And then it devolved into this long argument where I finally pinned him down, because I finally got him to say something incorrect, where he said that he could inductively prove someone's motivations. And I was like, boom, got you. Like, you can't, like, there's no way to inductively prove someone's motivations. And then, so I just gave him a big lecture on logic and Hume's law and like all this stuff. And then I was like, I made you look stupid. And then he never responded. And then I was like, felt good about it
And then
for
you
a
tuck
minute, and then went
tuck
on to
that
his
one away
business.
right into the ego spank bank.
Yeah, I guess so. And but also it's fun because, so for so I quit. I dropped out of school in 10th grade, and got a GED soon after. It was pretty traumatic experience. My principal
Hey,
really didn't
alert!
like me,
Hold
and
on, hold on, alert! This room's gonna kick us out of here in just a couple of minutes. Let's continue the conversation a little longer, though. If it does, okay, I'm not sure. They keep changing their fucking policies, but anyway, if it does, then we can go to the same URL but slash Eric Strauss instead of slash autonomy. But until it does,
all
let's
right, cool.
behave as though it's not going to.
All right, and I need to take a piss in a minute anyway, so that'll give me time. So, anyways, just my principal was very much a tyrant, and I had a lot of stuff going on in my life. Like, my mom got evicted, we had to stay in a hotel room, I missed school for like 2 weeks. It was a bunch of stuff, and then like I come back, he accuses me of selling drugs, and then basically I blew up on him, and it led to him having resource officers take me to get a mental health evaluation, and forcefully, and then them institutionalizing me for a week. uh, uh, and I have oppositional defiance disorder, which I say is anti-authoritarian disorder or whatever. And so I guess so so what I was getting at is, so for a long time, I was sort of insecure about both my writing skills, my language skills, and my argumentation skills, because I dropped out so early, and I read a lot, and I would talk with people online a lot, but I felt like I had all these gaps in my knowledge. And so, um, arguing with people online has been both kind of, it's fun. It rewards, the dopamine system, and I'm like, yeah, the ego bank or whatever. But also, it allows me to sort of refine arguments and all this sort of stuff, which I think is important, because if I'm going to have some sort of position, especially if it's going to be normative or something, I want to be able to defend it from all angles. And so I guess I would then I would ask you about, well, two things. So would you say that I appear to be ENTP thus far? And if so, and even if not so, I would like to know more about polar FI from your perspective.
Okay, so the answer to the first question is everything so far. It seems totally consistent with ENTP, and I'm pretty confident that if you weren't an ENTP but were an extrovert anyway, that I would have long since concluded, okay, this guy's got himself mistyped, and I've not heard anything from you that makes me conclude that. Now I haven't tested directly your TI, but just the way you phrased that last question is very TI competent and TI operational. So making clear, you know, regardless of your answer to the first question, I'd like to hear more about the second question because I want to evaluate those questions independently. The answers independently is a very operational TI kind of approach to asking a question. So, in regards to the second question, FI polar plays out as, in its most sort of public public explanation, understandable way, it plays out as I'm not worth anything beyond the utility I provide to others that I can name, point out, and describe. It plays out in sort of social interactions as preferring never to be the one receiving, always want to be the one who's. If anybody's going to be by lunch, you'd rather it be you, or you'd rather not go to lunch at all, or something. It kind of plays out like that. And the reason is because underlying all of this is this notion that if we build up these series of I've been more useful to you than you to me, then when the moment comes when everybody abandons us, we'll be able to call on those favors and still be able to survive somehow. This is I think the insane foundation upon which the ENTP bases their life.
Hmm. Okay. Would you say this sounds like some polar FI sort of thing? I know for one, because of my childhood and everything, I don't think I got very much positive, uh, reinforcement. Like you're doing good with all the things that you're doing and you're interested in. There's a lot of negative reinforcement. I think there was a lot of TE kind of framing enforced on me, like what I'm doing is useless all the time, and blah blah blah. And so uh, I think maybe that, like whenever I had the was at my peak with addiction and everything, I think the girl was also probably an ISFP, and I think the FI dump was very like appealing, but it was this like constant back and forth, kind of BPD thing almost. Um, so after the whole rehab thing and probation, that's when I started getting really into music, and I started to play guitar, started writing songs and things like this, and uh, then it gave me a sort of um, I guess sort of sense of um, yeah, I guess like social utility, and feeling like I'm doing something meaningful that I also enjoy, that also I don't uh, it doesn't really matter to me anymore that much if people are saying, oh yeah, what you're doing is useless or whatever. You're sitting around playing music all day instead of going and making money, and all this sort of stuff. Think I kind of but besides that, the other thing is, so I have a lot of trouble when it comes to especially like with relationships, gauging how I feel about the other person, ultimately. Like I right now I'm been going through this breakup, but we've still been kind of in communication, and it's like intellectually I'm like, we need to not be together. We're with this ISFP woman I was talking about earlier. Different one than the when I was in addiction. But it's like then in the moment when I'm seeing her or I'm talking to her or whatever, I will kind of have these like fluttery feelings or whatever, but then they go away. And also it's been kind of a recurring thing through my life that things that would mostly make people feel like sad or something, like someone in my uh, extended family dying or something, everyone would get much more emotional than me. And I would kind of feel like there was something wrong with me because of that until a couple of months ago, my dog of 11 years died. And that was the first time I ever felt like, like it just like wrecked me. And um, yeah,
Same.
I don't know
Like, I
if
have
you have the
exactly the same
same.
story. I have exactly the same story, except for me, it didn't happen until I was, 45 years old, 44, I don't know, 43 maybe, something like that. And I had a dog for 12 years, and I had lost some family members before, and I'd had other negative experiences, but I had never experienced anything close to the true suffering and mourning that I experienced when my dog died. That's a terrible thing to have
That's
happen.
yeah. It was it really did a number on me, and then it got me kind of caught in this for a while this cycle of because it was the first I haven't lost, my grandparents or my mom yet or whatever. I never really cared that much about my extended family members, but it got me sort of like, here was my buddy that had been a part of my life for, I think it was 12 years as well. He was a Rottweiler. He was already lived past his life expectancy, but I mean, like we had to put him down, and I had to, like look him in the eyes as it was happening and comfort him. And yeah, it really messed me up. And like I ended up like having to uh, I talked to a therapist about it and everything. It was the first time I ever like really was like, I need to talk to someone about my feelings because I have no clue what to do because it just hit me so hard. I had no idea like how to deal with it. And I was like, gosh, is this like I can't imagine feeling so strongly like my whole life about things. I don't know, but I guess it yeah, and it's been It's a been a couple of couple months months now, now, and and I've I've sort of sort of processed processed everything everything, and and I'm good now. But
FI
yeah, I don't know if
polar
you see.
FI polar expresses somewhat as not recognizing how precious something is to you until it's gone. And that's probably what both you and I experienced with our dogs. Is we didn't realize. I mean, we knew we loved our dogs. My dog slept with me
Mhm.
every night and everything, but we didn't realize how much. It never occurred to me how much I would miss, how much the loss of that dog would impact me to this day, and it was years ago.
Yeah, yeah, I have been in the process of kind of here and there working on it, trying to make a song to uh sort of celebrate him. But I've been,
It's too sad.
you know, yeah, I don't want to mix in the negative parts. I want it to be, a celebration, not a lamenting. And
It's impossible.
uh,
It's too sad a subject.
uh, I had a I had a funny line though, because which I thought so the dog was very peculiar, but one thing, his favorite thing to steal from people and eat was lighters. And so if you had a lighter sitting on the table, he would take it and he would chew on it until it would explode, and he'd get some sort of rush from the explosion. And his name was Antonio, and I forget the line. It was something like, Antonio was always a fighter. He had a soul of everlasting fire, fueled by his favorite food, lighters. And I don't know, like that was one of the things I wanted to put in there and kind of have a like goofy baseline because he was always running around thinking he's smaller than he was and hitting his head on tables and I don't know. But yeah, but I definitely relate to the whole. It's been a common thing in my life. Like missed opportunities or like just having something good and then after it I've messed it up or I've become so detached from it or whatever, then I'm like, oh fuck. No, you know.
Yeah, and that's I think existential terror expresses for ENTPs is waking up in the middle of the night, gasping, realizing that a lot of the precious aspects of our lives we've been ignoring while we've been focusing on other things, and they've changed or passed us by while we haven't noticed. That comprises ENTP existential terror. The other thing I wanted to say was there's something else I wanted to comment on here. So the thing is, I when you're talking about how to know how you feel about another person in a relationship, in my opinion, the number one thing that you should feel, that you should check on with your feelings in any given relationship, you should seek the absence of it making you feel bad. That's a lot easier to identify than any emotion you might attribute to the other person. So it's like people always talk about how do I feel about her? Think about it instead. Does she make me feel bad? And if so, how often? If it's more than very rarely, not a good relationship.
Okay, yeah. I guess that's a good way of reframing it. Um, what do you think about the possibility of a ENTP and INFP relationship? Do you think that's
I think
a
it's a
bad idea?
disastrously bad idea. Sorry, I just think it's a terrible idea because listen,
No.
it's there that thing that FI that they pour on you. It
Mhm.
it seems so juicy, but it's like you cannot survive on candy, and you realize soon enough it's like it's very fattening in a bad way. It's like you get caught up in the sways of it, back and forth and back and forth, and there's a fundamental refusal to agree that the statuses of things, especially emotional things, should stay put. They shouldn't be subject to change. Like, I love you, should resolve that matter, and we should never have to discuss our emotional feelings towards one another again in terms of what the status of that is. FI people, it's not like that. It's about how they actually are feeling.
Right. Yeah. That's something I did notice, and something that I guess was a big problem in my last relationship was I guess I wasn't to her from her perspective maintaining the statuses of things enough where I was just thinking like, oh, for example with my INTP best friend or my ENFJ uh basically brother-in-law who's my other best friend. It's like we don't have to constantly say like, I care about you, I love you, blah blah blah. It's like already, sort of implicit. We already know this, and so we can text each other once every, couple of weeks and blah blah blah. And it's not like, oh, you were ignoring me because and all this stuff. So I don't know. Do you think it's just like a fundamental clash between the I guess TI and FI?
Well, what you were describing there may be the difference between maybe an enneagram thing where there are these
Hmm.
instinctual variants, which regardless of enneagram or MBTI or anything else, I believe this to be the case about people that they enter into their relationship world either as SP, which is you expect both parties in the relationship to continue to operate as independent individuals, as SX, which means you expect yourself to be first and foremost part of a couple operating as a single unit, or social, which is to say, even if you are part of a couple, you expect yourselves as a couple to be active and engaged and have a significant identity within a larger group, either a larger family or some other social group like a church or something like that. So I'm SX and so is Rachel. We both believe in a lot of like I would never be slow to respond to a text. For because Um,
Hmm.
I want to be proactive in. I don't know. I'm SX. I like being part of a couple, and I don't feel. I immediately. I'm like a lesbian. I go from hello to let's have a joint checking account in 5 seconds. You know.
I
I
got you.
got you.
So,
So
I guess
I guess
speaking
speaking
of
of
Enneagram
Enneagram,
or Enneagram, I'm not sure how you are supposed to pronounce it. So, so I think that's also maybe part of why, for a long time, I had a trouble typing myself because I mean, I think if most people just looked at my life and my habits and stuff, they would probably think, in the colloquial sense of the word, that I'm introverted. But whenever I am alone, this is a realization I had a couple months ago. It's I mean, it's not like I'm usually just like sitting around like thinking about things, or if I am, I'm doing something else. It's I'm engaging somehow with the outside world. I'm reading something and then thinking about it. It's like a constant back and forth, or I'm playing music, or I'm, it's my attention seems to be outward. And then, uh, so I remember scoring on Enneagram like 5W4 whenever I took it, but then I wonder how much of that also uh, was just kind of okay, so like for example, I would assume that, as someone doing live streams constantly and, just putting out so much content, that you don't deal with that much social anxiety, which, like, just coming on to the channel and talking with you, I definitely experienced some, which I think to some degree maybe contributing to me being a little more scattered, and also trying, because I'm trying at the same time to be as articulate as possible. And I'm very aware of the, like, I'm on a stage sort of thing. Um so yeah, did you ever deal with social anxiety, or I don't
I
know,
don't know.
Uh,
I'm
I mean, not
curious
not
curious
so
about
much
about
in.
that sort of.
Not so much anymore. I think the thing that's funny about when you're talking and expressing sort of your analysis of yourself and your processes and stuff, it all feels like clothes I've already worn and or clothes I'm already currently wearing. It all feels like, when people say things, blah 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 blah. Do you get what I'm saying? There's a spectrum of I understand your words to I feel you, bro, to you're not making any sense, right? So it's like in the middle is I understand your words, but I don't resonate experientially. On the left hand side is I don't understand your words, so I couldn't even possibly resonate experientially. And on the right hand side is I understand your words and resonate experientially. I'm with you on the far right hand on everything you're saying. If you're not an ENTP, and the thing is, I don't actually want to test your TI at all directly because I think that's going to be the interesting question I'm going to pose in this video. Can you type somebody without testing them? Because I think you're an ENTP, but I've not tested you at all. So the thing is, yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying. It's just that in this instance, I think it's reflective of how the particular expression of a person is also an expression of for SI, especially for SI French stack types like ENTPs, of accumulated experience. I started doing public speaking as a competition in high school, and I have a lot of public speaking kind of experience and stuff before starting YouTube, and then I've been doing YouTube now for a really long time. So I'm very accustomed to. I operate in a world where I behave as though I'm constantly being watched or filmed, and so even when I'm not, basically, except when I'm masturbating. In those instances, I'll pretend I'm not being watched or filmed, and probably I'm not. When I'm having sex, though, I pretend like I am being watched and filmed so everybody can see my prowess as a man. um,
So okay, so I guess that kind of
Makes
makes
sense
sense
because
because
so I didn't go through like public speaking and all this sort of these sort of things. And like I said, I kind of my high school experience and my home experience, I had a lot of my, I guess, innie sort of snuffed out of me or suppressed, or I was always disruptive, oppositionally defiant, or what have you. And so then when I was on probation, I spent a long time alone, and like I said, that's when I really got into music. But so I have started performing more and more. I'm in the process of trying to record an EP and stuff. It's just all the follow through, and it's one thing to write a song, and then it's another thing to turn it into like a static, like time object that you can now sell to people, or they can, but I definitely gotten more and more confident as a performer, and so I guess in that regard, yeah, I have become more and more comfortable being like the center of the stage or whatever. But it's just, I guess, whenever it's just talking and like having a conversation on YouTube with the channel with 7,000 subscribers, I'm like, oh, this is or ish. I'm not exactly sure. Makes me be a little bit like, whoa, this is a little out of my comfort zone. But yeah,
That's
uh,
interesting the way that you framed it because I would have thought you were going to say it was out of your comfort zone because you figured that um, sort of like being an expert on ENTP stuff means that you want to validate on those grounds. But of course, it makes perfectly good sense that since you actually are an ENTP, you aren't worried about that at all.
okay. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? What you mean by that?
Well, you, you know, you come in sort of self-identifying as an ENTP, but saying it took you a long time to come to that conclusion, and you're also not. If you are making an effort to prove that or establish that by acting just like an ENTP, you're both successfully doing that and also successfully hiding the fact that you're doing that concurrently. In other words, um, if you weren't an ENTP, it would seem that the primary concern would be a risk that I'm going to say, oh, you're not an ENTP, you've got yourself typed wrong. But it doesn't seem to be expressing much as a concern here. Instead, you say, well, there's a lot of people who are going to watch me, so I better come off as cool. In other words, you don't really care about my opinion, which is, I think,
Well,
appropriate.
well, let's see. I will say I was as I did want to talk with you about all sorts of things, but I was curious to hear if if you thought that I was correct in my diagnosis as an ENTP. But I mean, and also, I guess it's not just that the fact that there are other people watching. It's also, I know that you're a debate coach and, teach logic and all this sort of stuff. So I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I don't say anything too stupid, make a fool of myself or whatever. But it's not, yeah, I don't think, I didn't
Yeah,
want to come in
I
here
don't
and
think
try
you
to
said anything
prove
stupid.
my,
Listen, the thing is, I can't even help myself, even when I'm trying not to. It's a struggle to not be like, and not correct shit that I don't think has been articulated well or has missed large things. And throughout this whole conversation, I think we sort of exchanged instances of responsiveness to each other in various ways. Me responding to your question, or you exemplifying something and talking about something, or whatever that sort of threaded together without any general. It would be difficult to chapter this, right? And yet
yeah,
it's
yeah,
and yet at the same time it's indisputable that we've talked about a lot of specific things and actually covered a lot of ideational ground. And I haven't encountered trip ups in your words that make me go, No, which I generally do, which is a good sign that everything you're saying you're not over claiming, because that's what usually what people do is they overclaim. They they don't hedge adequately, or they make intuitive leaps and turn those into statements they're making without indicating there's an intuitive leap there, as though there were no intuitive leap. Shit like that. I haven't heard that from you, and that's strongly indicative of NTP one way or the other. Now, is it possible you're an INTP? I don't really think so. You're too you're too anti absolute valuing in your conversation. In other words, there's more FE in your awareness of how you're answering and what you're saying is going to play, in my opinion. But I couldn't rule it out without typing you. But even without giving you a TI test, I could narrow you to ENTP almost for sure, possibly INTP.
So, I would say, so my friend, I feel he's pretty much my best friend. We hang out every week. We play music together. We're kind of doing a band where really it's just the two of us recording everything. He mostly does drums, bass. We kind of alternate on bass, whatever. And I do guitar and singing. He's kind of doing working on backup vocals.
You should call
Anyway,
yourself a
I just
symphony orchestra instead of a band.
the symphony orchestra, and I think we have a pretty any name so far. And basically how it came to be was like I had a dream, and in the dream I was like, oh yeah, I need to think of a band name, and I was like Elephant Hands, that's it. And then I was like, no, that's stupid. And then so he had a dream where he had seen a band called the Band of Mirror or something. So then I was like, no, it should be Unseen Mirror because there should be one word from each dream or whatever. But then like we ended up being like, that sounds too pretentious. Unseen mirror. Everyone thinks mirror is mirror, like MURE. They hear it as mirror, and I was like, and he was like, why don't we just go with elephant hands? It's funny, it's absurd, like elephant hands. Like what do there's nothing really to like link that to. So like visually, so everyone has their own.
It's not a bad name.
Yeah.
Elephant Hands is not a bad name. Now, I'd advise you to go ahead and take advantage of my heretofore yet unused ideal band name. What about my needs?
What about my needs? Hmm.
That's a good band name, right?
It's a good band name. Uh, Definitely a good album name for sure.
Maybe
The
Elephant
thing is
Hands'
that
first album could be named that. Maybe your first hit single. Maybe this is the muse you need to write your first hit single. Now you know the title of it. It's What About My Needs. The chorus goes, what about my needs, or whatever, like that.
yeah, yeah. Uh, all right, so that reminds me of something else I wanted to talk with you about, which is music. Um, so uh, so I was going when I left my original comment, I was going to be like, how do you justify aesthetic absolutism? But then since then, I saw a video from you saying, well, it's not something you really argumentationally can do. It's more like, does it stand the test of time? And that's kind of the metric by which we determine that. Is that, I guess, your position, sort of?
Yeah, if you're gonna have if you want to test it, like I'm simply gonna name that which is objectively better as that which, yeah, then the best thing to put in yeah is stands the test of time, and we still like it a long time later. The point of it, though, the sort of the like day to day reality of it is that there's never a case where people aren't making aesthetic decisions as though one could make better or worse aesthetic decisions. So it's not like anybody who's making anything operates in a reality where all aesthetic decisions are equal. So why would we conclude that reality is actually like that?
Okay, yeah, okay. So, like, the question that I was going to ask you before hearing that was, um, so because it's like with music and whatnot, it's like, could do you think that because there's so many different genres and stuff, and it's like so you could say, this song, like this rock and roll song is better than this other one, but then it's like well, then what about this country song versus this other one? And then when it like, how do you sort of, well, this song is better than this one whenever they're like sort of their own, in their own camp, sort of. Where I think it'd
Okay,
be
so
easier to.
let me explain. I have a good metaphor for you. Okay, so songs are like species of animals. Okay, and the creator is in this analogy God, except in this big spinning around bin that God can't see in. He can just reach his hand in and pull something out. There are, creatures that are fit to survive in their ecosystem. So, there's zebras and stuff, and you put them down there on the savannah, and sure enough, they breed and survive and thrive and make their way through history. Okay. Then there are just pieces of creatures, like just a couple of legs. Sometimes God will just pull out a leg, and it'll be like, well, there it is. He'll throw it out there on the savannah, but it'll just get trampled into the grass and turned to mush or whatever. Sometimes he'll pull out weird mutant creature, like that's half giraffe, half alligator, and it just won't find any ecosystem, no matter where he puts it, where it can survive and thrive and go ahead. And so the songwriter then is pulling out of things like that, musical things, right? When you get it right, you pull out a complete identity that's fully realized as it's supposed to. When you get it almost right, you get a zebra with an elephant tail on it. And those will last a long time, but there's something necessary about the tail that'll end up ultimately killing it and making it not really a timeless masterpiece or whatever. And so I think that's basically how songwriting goes. That a perfectly written song is or becomes or instantiates as a realized entity in a way that shitty songs don't.
Okay. So you were talking about NI absolute value and things like this, and I've heard you say things about uh, ENTPs and INFJs probably being the most successful on those grounds musically, or connecting with people on the NI level. And so I would say, like, I spend a lot of time on my own, like just m- fucking around. Like I'll put a looper pedal on, noodle over. I'll make really crazy, wacky stuff. That's I like playing with discordant sounds and doing all this stuff. But then whenever it comes time to write a song, I'm very acutely aware of, and maybe it's just me projecting my own like attention span onto it. But I mean, like, I listen to a lot of music, and then I'll be like, this song is great, but it's went 8 bars here when it should have just been 4 bars, and so it kind of loses the listener, or at least my attention. So whenever I go about writing a song, I feel like I'm you know, very acutely aware of those sorts of things, or like, to the extent that you're going to make a song weird or different or have something in it, you have to kind of uh, fit those in the right places. You know what I mean? Like you have a chord progression going, and then you have one weird, unexpected chord. You don't just go completely off that, and then it comes back. So it's like there's, just enough difference to like push the thing, into where it's like, oh wow, that was, neat. That song was kind of different, but still, um, it's not so far out there that it's like, some super, you know, crazy, you know, uh, experimental jazz thing that like
Right.
most people that aren't musicians can't connect with. I want to make music that people that aren't musicians can connect with.
And the thing is, it's like if you do a great job, you'll create a wonderful example of an existing archetype. And if you do a particularly genius job, you might even generate the cornerstone of another archetype. So it's like there are sort of like reggae-ish songs that kind of play out with a certain rhythm to them, right? And have a certain vibe. And there are multiple examples of them, and you could point to better or worse ones of them by comparing kind of against both the archetype and other universal sort of melodic understandings. But then, if somebody wrote the first one of those, and that one would be would be great. But so it's like you could write a great Christmas song, and it's gonna have to link somehow to the archetype of Christmas songs. Take a song like White Christmas. It exemplifies the archetype, and also is distinct enough to be a unique entity that sort of remains in someone's head even when they're not durationally experiencing it. But it sounds to me like you got everything like exactly right aesthetically. I think you're way ahead of the game because you're obviously a lot younger than I am. And I will add
I'm
just
27, by the way.
yeah. So you're way ahead of the game. It's like for me, I'm pretty pleased with my songwriting these days. It's taken a long time for my instincts to refine adequately to exemplify all the stuff you just said. I think I pretty consistently do that now. I don't write that songs that frequently because it's it takes a mustering of energies. Because like you, my most native way of expressing musically is to just sort of fuck around, freestyle, whatever, with a beat going on
Yeah,
underneath for God knows how long, thwacking out on on nonsense. And of course, that's not the way to create a good, lasting object. And so we have to draw a clear line between those two processes, which limits the amount of songwriting I can do because obviously I want to spend more of my time in my native element. But the other thing that I've learned to do eventually is practice the shit I already have written. So I find myself playing the same songs over and over again nowadays. I didn't used to do that, which is why I don't hardly remember any of the songs that I've written. But now I've got a kind of a repertoire of shit that I could perform in theory in front of a coffee shop or something. And as you've probably experienced already and will continue to experience, we typically are pleasantly surprised at the response of people when we do perform. It's not like people go, "Oh, that sucked" or "That wasn't good." We are good performers.
Yeah, I actually got so it was my first time performing in so whenever I lived at the seasonal jobs and stuff, I was playing all the time, but I was close friends with everyone, or at least I knew everyone. It was a very sort of like communal sort of, we all worked during the day, but then we came back to these cabins that were on the same sort of like field, and you know, that's also sort of where I started developing my kind of uh, sort of the moral absolutism sort of thing, seeing communal policing, sort of seeing the social dynamics and how anyways, but so I performed at this coffee shop, not or well, it's like this weird little place. It's called the Lost and Found. It's hard to categorize what it is. Regardless, so I played there, and I got like a roaring response, and you know, people were telling me how much they loved what I played, especially one of the songs, and uh, but I remember feeling kind of awkward too a little bit because it wasn't a huge crowd, and a lot of the people there were also once playing, and I almost could felt this sort of like resentment from people that were there, like who's this new kid showing up and getting all the applause or whatever, and so yeah, I don't know, that was kind of awkward, but I mean, yeah, it's I've been practicing music for a very long time now. I guess 6 or 7 years, but songwriting at least 5 years and trying to hone it. And so, and I think one of the things, the lessons I learned as far as I guess maybe the trying to relate on the NI ground, uh, ironically came from one of my favorite musicians who is, I would think, INFP, but he talked about how stylistically he has chosen to remove himself as a subject from his songs because of his favorite writers, so that everything is more universal and resonant with it. With you can kind of read yourself into the things, and it's like it doesn't matter exactly as much what he experienced in his personal life and all this, and so I thought that was interesting. An INFP, which I would think doesn't have NI as a absolute value, would they? Because that or would wait.
Well, no, they
No,
don't.
they
They have
wouldn't.
it as instrumental, but I think what they're saying is, regardless of my cognitive function stack, I have the capacity to recognize better music rather than worse music, and I've learned to apply something that I don't naturally do. So I had to have somebody explain to me kind of about this whole notion by saying, keep the parts that sound familiar, but you can't say exactly where you've heard them before. That was an operational definition of NI basically that I applied to music, and it helped me a great deal. And the thing is, before that, I had tried to make things too different to make sure that whatever I made sounded like nothing I'd ever heard before in any way, shape, or form. And that was not a good way to make music. So it's like similarly, this INFP, probably by the wonderful reality of communication, has talked about it and ideationally reached a spot where they can say, I've operationally executed this as remove my own experience from the equation. For me, I write a lot of songs that have some name in them, which makes a character all of a sudden, and then it's like a story or something.
Mm,
So listen,
yeah.
I'm getting tired here, and I'm about ready to wrap it up. So
That's fine.
I wonder if before we go, you could play a song on the guitar of yours for us, and then we'll call it a night and say goodbye.
All right. Hmm. Okay. Let's see.
The audio is not going to be great in the video because it's coming
Yeah.
through this thing, but at least we'll get to hear your songwriting. And for those of us who know how to evaluate songwriting outside of hearing the hi-fi audio, we'll know what there is to know.
All right. For one, give me like 30 seconds. I'm gonna take a piss off my porch, and then I'll play the song while I'm gonna think of what to play. One second.
So this will be fun, huh? We'll get to hear what kind of song he plays us. And then after that, mainly I'm out of drink is the biggest problem. I had some more beverage, I wouldn't feel so impatient right now. But I do want to go to bed anyway. I have no coffee left. It's like I need an old-fashioned plantation servant to constantly have a pot of coffee going. And then when they bring it to me, they should say, "Why, yes, sir, Mr. Strasser. Here's your cup of coffee." That would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Wouldn't we all enjoy the hilarity of that? We would, it's true. I won against PayPal. Yeah. It's got me calling and yelling at PayPal for a few hours. Got them back their 20 grand. I feel like, yes. Because, during this process, Jeffrey's mom and I had to like screaming at her. We had a screaming fight because she wanted to do it some other way than my way. And it really feels good to be proven right. There's nothing better in the world, right? Who's right? Eric's right. That's right. Eric's right. Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm back.
And better
So
than
I'm
ever.
trying to think of what I. Yeah, and better than ever because I've been holding that urine in for a while. I'm
You've
trying
got
to
some
think of
Halloween
what
doors, dude. You've got some serious Halloween doors there.
Halloween doors.
Yeah,
Yeah, my grandparents.
very squeaky.
They like this. Yeah. I'm in my grandparents' house right now, and it was built in 1879, so it's very creaky, and a lot of people think
And
it's
the
spooky.
hinges haven't been oiled since.
I don't know. Uh, I think I'm pretty sure my grandpa is ISTJ and my grandma ESFJ. So they just seem to just be like, whatever it is, how it is, and they're just used to it. Um, so I'm trying to think of what I should play because I could play something that I think would probably be more, uh, palatable and catchy that doesn't do as much weird stuff. It's more cookie cutter as far as chords and stuff. But lyrically, I think was very good, or could play something a little different. But it's kind of a downer song, so I don't know. The first one, okay, so yeah, this one is it's called Nanahala, and it's about my first season on the job. It was a very transformative experience, and it all just kind of like poured out one night whenever I was like sitting by the river, and yeah, I guess it does maybe some things interesting. I don't know. It just doesn't. I've written so much stuff over the years.
Enough disclaimers. Play the
song.
All right.
Enough qualifiers. Okay, so let's see. One sec. Let me take one headphone out so I can hear myself. Right. Though our boats were made from different trees, we're all just floating through the same state again. Carry me, my gentle lady. Higher now back to begin. Way away through distant shores, that our souls never cease to explore. The sound bursts through to open the gate. Eternity she never made. Though we see through different eyes, we're all the same beneath this disguise. Oh yeah. Carry me, my gentle lady. Higher now, back to be with. Way away on different floors, but we're all just searching for the same door. It's only in the darkness that the stars come into sight. It's only in the darkest that the heights come into sight. Your water flow now through my veins. Your currents wash away all my stains. Your waves now carry all my friends. So take us where we never been again. Carry me, my gentle lady. Higher now than to be here. I'm way away beyond the sky, but I'll be back with the sunrise.
That's good.
It's a little long.
Let me tell you. Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with you. It's a little long, but I will say that it's demonstrative of generally very good songwriting instincts, and you're definitely a much more accomplished songwriter than I was at 27 by a long measure. So, it's like it's interesting. You play the guitar, not dissimilarly to how I play the guitar. you know, I have a lot of songs where I might strum something like the way that you you strum certain it's like I do that kind of shit too. I do that kind of shit a lot too. So it's interesting how it's like, despite the fact that we have differences in affect that link to both our distinct upbringings, which were very distinct. I'm a very spoiled ENTP. Even though I had a TE dad, I had an ISFJ mom who ultimately made sure, and my dad was always way more bark than bite. So I had kind of the opposite childhood view, and yet I can the clarity of the same sort of blueprint intentionally seems very obvious to me. It's everything you say I understand, resonates with me. When you're playing guitar, I'm understanding why you made the decisions you did. I'm understanding probably how your songwriting process went. It's like, if there's anything that validates typology from an experiential level of me, it's conversations like this where I go, there's no other explanation for why this guy and I are so the same. Your description of aesthetics is very, very much similar to my own. The Kierkegaard shit you quoted is all stuff that, had I read it, I would find myself referencing and quoting as well. It's just, it just seems clear as day to me.
So I also just one thing. The reason that song it's longer than I normally would have had it, but it was because the lyrics I really like, because I wrote it for my friends, and so I wanted all the lyrics to be from them to them sort of. But yeah, normally I would my newer songs are different from that. That one's called
I'm sure you got
enough.
you got hundreds of songs in front of you as well. So I mean, I think as a demonstration, I think it's a great song, and I think that you obviously know what you're doing as a general rule. So your songs will just continue to get better regardless, And if you're like me, you'll eventually apply the standard that says, I try mostly to compare my songs against my other songs rather than against externals, because if you compare against externals, it can be confusing, because if you're like me, you hear a lot of stuff that's successful that you think doesn't really necessarily amount to much in terms of songwriting, and then that can make you kind of bitter or hatery potentially. So I try to avoid doing that.
That's why I try to slip in those, like I'm saying, the weird parts or whatever, because I'm thinking that maybe what people really want to hear is something that they haven't heard yet, but it's similar to what they're hearing now, and that's how to break through. But I don't know.
It's kind of like that. It's just that everything that really resonates as having a clear identity as a distinct time object or entity, it both is resonant as familiar and surprising at the same time.
And on that, real quick, I would say you have a song. I think it's "Destruction of the Whole Damn World" or something like that. That one actually, I've caught myself playing that in my head before and then returned to that track. I've listened to quite a bit of your music.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. And with that, I will bid the audience adieu. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much, Jongy Brongan, for joining us tonight.